Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our story, When Dragons Came to Alice Street by Francesca Hampton, illustrated by Carl Chu, cover art by Patricia Forrest. Chapter 2, Flying Across an Ocean. The sky was just growing light when the dragons came back, flying out of the last stars to the west. Brenda was the first to notice, since she was already awake. Smiling, she reached up to stroke her dragon's huge green nose as it settled gracefully beside her. The male dragon stretched its neck between Tim and James and began to make some strange, snuffling, clicking, woofing sounds. "What's he doing?" Brenda whispered to her dragon. "Is he okay?" "He says he must wake them with chicken noises," her dragon says. "That is the signal." "But chickens don't sound like that," Brenda whispered back. "They don't?" The lady dragon looked interested. Gorwin was sure he had it right. He said it was in his genes. But now that you mention it, I can't remember ever meeting a chicken with him. The male dragon leaned lower and lower over Tim's sleeping face, making his scrabbly, clicking, growling sound. Suddenly, there was a great shriek as James, lying under the dragon's armpit, woke up. And then Tim just about levitated straight up out of his lounge chair when he opened his eyes to see the gigantic smoking nostrils looming just above his face. "You just about scared us to death," Tim yelled at him. "Why did you do that?" "Goodness, don't make such a fuss," Gorwin said a little grumpily. "You two sleep like rocks. I had to cluck a little more loudly than usual, that's all." "Cluck," echoed James, incredulous. The dragon ignored him. "Now, children, hurry and grab a bite for breakfast and some things you can take with you in your pockets." He peered around at Jackie and Marina and pointed meaningfully with his green, hairless chin at a nearby door. "And be sure you all use the El Baño before you go. We have a long way to fly and not much time to get there now." Brenda giggled. "You pronounced it wrong," she informed her dragon. "The L already means the. You just told us to use the bathroom." Brenda was a very smart girl who spoke and read in two languages, English and Spanish, when most children were proud of reading in even one. Said Gorwin, "just hurry up." The second leg of their journey seemed to pass even faster than the first. Although the winds passed gently around them with no more pressure than before, the seas below went sizzling by. Boats appeared on the horizon and were passed in a matter of seconds. The big waves below were a blur, though Tim did notice they seemed to be getting bigger and bigger the further south they went. "Why are the waves getting bigger?" he yelled in the dragon's ear. Garwin answered something he could barely make out. It sounded like "foon." "Yes, we're having fun," Tim assured the dragon, "but why are the waves getting bigger?" "Typhoon," the dragon pronounced more distinctly this time. And so it was. The children watched in dismay as a circling wall of clouds filled the sky and the seas below grew dark green with white on their peaks and purple valleys of shadow between them. The giant waves were lashing the air with foam higher and higher. The dragons began to climb higher as well to get above the violent winds and driving rain, and then higher still. Soon they looked down on the most remarkable sight you can imagine. A great mass of clouds, like a creamy white river, coiled below them in an enormous slow circle that actually looked peaceful and lazy from high above. The sun glinted gold on its surface. They could no longer see the dark storminess underneath. Marina looked behind her and smiled when she saw that two little stormy petrels, the tiniest birds of the ocean, had hitched a ride with them, clinging to the back of the dragon, just as they sometimes clung to boats on the sea. Look, she cried happily to Tim and James. But Tim and James were trying to keep their eyes from crossing from being up so high. The air that high has very little oxygen to breathe, and all the children were beginning to feel a bit dizzy. They were also cold from getting wet. But in the magical way they had traveled so far, so fast over the Pacific, this discomfort also passed away with unnatural speed. In what seemed only a few moments, the great menacing circle of cloud and wind was far away, drifting to the northwest, and the sky was filled with soft late afternoon sunlight again as the dragons dropped back lower. The wind had grown warm and moist, and far below they saw the outline of an island, ringed in crystal white sands with palm trees along its shore. The laboring wings of the dragons slowed, and they began to circle downwards, lower and lower. It was easier to breathe again, and the children were warm as they looked down on the island. There were lagoons and palm forests, but at first it appeared there were no dwellings on the island except for a single little hut far down a distant peninsula, and only a small beacon of light within it. The dragons settled on the white crystal sand as gracefully as seagulls, lifting their multicolored wings almost vertically upward as they spilled the last of the air out of them. Sergio was the first to let go and tumble off, whooping with delight as he landed in the soft sand. Tim and James and Marina and Brenda and Jackie were right behind him, picking up the wonderful stuff in awe and letting it run through their hands. For surely this was most unusual sand. It was white as ground diamonds and glittered with the light of a newly risen full moon as it fell. And it was as warm as the tropic night air. Mangoes! Jackie cried, looking up at a large low-branched tree in front of them. And coconuts, Sergio crowed, picking up one from the beach and taking it over to a large piece of coral rock to try and break it open. He had seen how this was done on TV and never thought he would actually be able to try it himself. Whomp! Ew, Brenda said, as the white liquid began to drip out of the crack in the rock had made, falling into the sand. Yuck, Marina added for good measure, and Jackie nodded her head solemnly. It's good, Sergio insisted, even though he had never actually tasted fresh coconut milk himself. Look! He picked up the hairy brown shell and bravely tipped it over to let some of the milk fall into his mouth. He made a face and Brenda laughed. No, actually, it's good, he insisted. I was just expecting it to be bad. He broke open the rest of the shell and shared out the pieces with everyone. And indeed, the chewy white fresh coconut was amazingly tasty, especially since they were so hungry, for the snacks in their pockets were long gone. Would you like some? Guiltily, Sergio held up the last two pieces of coconut to the two dragons. The male dragon raised a quizzical eye at him. Even half a coconut was about as big as a piece of gum in comparison to a dragon. Thank you, no, the female said quickly, before her grumpy mate could say something rude. We'll be leaving you here to do a bit of fishing. It's a lovely warm night. Just have your little dinner and lie down in the nice warm sand, and we'll see you in the morning. Sergio looked dubiously around. Sleep? In the sand? Aren't there any? But the two dragons were already lifting off and away, and the other children were busy collecting mangoes and guavas and more coconuts from all the fruit trees that surrounded them. They settled down for the night at last, still a little hungry but for more familiar food, but resigned to the fact that there would be no more supper. They wiggled in the sand to make a fit for their bodies comfortably and put more warm sand on top of themselves until they made a lineup of little mounds and big mounds. "Stop giggling," Tim ordered from somewhere in the middle of the lineup. "You're making me laugh and all the sand keeps falling off." Tim can be very fierce, but this just made them all laugh some more and required more sand arranging. At last, though, they all fell silent and started to relax. With the heat from the day still trapped in the sand, their unusual beds turned out to be surprisingly cozy, and they drifted to sleep in minutes, though Jackie tried to stay awake a little longer so she could look up at the stars. She had never in her whole life seen a sky so filled with so many stars. And that's the end of chapter 2. Look forward to chapter 3. We'll read it tomorrow.